welcome one and all once again to our 8th edition of the Knowledge Exchange. So my name is Esther and I'm joined by my co-host Elitha, and we are delighted to have with us two very special guest panelists in the persons of Dalian Adofo and David Simon. So a very warm welcome once again. Dalian Adofo is co-director of the educational initiative Ancestral Voices, advocating for positive representations and reflections of African spiritual philosophies and knowledge systems to debunk the negative stigma and propaganda that colonialism attached to it and continues today. In existence for 10 years now, Ancestral Voices provides a range of audiovisual learning resources and books, as well as online courses teaching about African spirituality. Dalian is also a published academic researcher and a fellowship scholar of Miranda Net Fellowship, a leading UK educational think tank. David Simon is an author, educationalist, and co-founder of Simon Education. Since beginning in 1987, Simon Education has supported over 6,000 African Caribbean families in the UK. David has won numerous awards as an educationalist and a novelist and poet, including the Peterloo Poetry Award. He is also the founder of Black Book Festival, an annual event to promote Black writers globally. He is the author of the Genius series that includes best-selling books, How to Unlock Your Child's Genius and How to Unlock Your Genius Using Black History. So, not to delay proceedings, just to give those who may be joining us for the first time a bit of an overview as to how we conduct our meetings. So the Knowledge Exchange is primarily concerned with liberally sharing information that ultimately positions us as Black people, African people, as worthy and as the priority, which is often not the case. And the idea is to do this to such an extent that we actually begin to action in order to change the situation that we find ourselves in. And those changes then reflect the truth that we believe as a community. So this edition is no exception. And I'm very, very conscious that this is a topic that does cut very close to the bone for a lot of people for obvious reasons. But we do need to, of course, encourage these uncomfortable conversations and difficult conversations, really just to allow us to effectively heal so that we may actually be able to build in a sustainable way. The quote that I want to share is actually from the Bible. So it is very, very fitting and may well take on a whole new meaning, come the end of this meeting. But the quote is from John 8:32, which reads, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." So that's where we are. And I will, at this stage, like to hand over to Brother Dalian Adofo to offer us a definition of African spirituality, philosophy, for those who may not necessarily be that familiar with African spirituality.
Many thanks, Sister Esther. That is a big ask that you've asked, to define African spirituality. But we can give it a shot. Just for the record, I don't think we can have a specific or singular definition for African spirituality because it is an all-encompassing system that takes in all aspects of what we might call the lived experience or even our physical selves. Yeah, so African spirituality, I guess, as it's at its simplest, is a superstructure that connects all the various aspects of society, or a community. Because within what we call African spirituality, you might have healing modalities with plants, yes, with particular herbs, with certain foliage that can have a medicinal effect, yeah, in the same way that, you know, you might take a pill today and get some relief from your symptoms. Part of African spirituality is healing modalities. There's aspects for the development of the self and being in touch with the self in order to develop the best possible aspects of our abilities and our talents. Yes, all of these are included within what we can call African spirituality. Yeah, some people prefer to call it a natural science, because of this specific purpose, because it's about having a very close relationship with nature to inform yourself just really how similar you are to nature. And we have a lot of particularly, should we say, Western scientific theories within the space that they now call quantum science that are proving a lot of the concepts and theories within African spirituality. So at its simplest, African spirituality is a superstructure that ties in all aspects of the lived experience in a community or within a group of people. It's not just religious. It's religious. It's medicinal. It's psychological. It is, in a sense, chromosomic. Yeah, it's a range of things that ties together the formation and lived experience within a community. That's the simplest way I could describe what African spirituality entails.
A very helpful account and definition, although I do appreciate that it's very difficult to define it. But thank you for doing a great job, Brother Dalian.
No, my pleasure.
So I think that's a very helpful backdrop to set the presentation that we have coming up now from Brother David. So whilst Brother David sets up his presentation, just want to again invite you to recognize that there are no silly questions. There are no questions that are off bounds. So please, again, do feel free to share anything that you have in the Q&A.
Okay, shall I make a start?
Yes, please.
Okay then, okay. Once again, I'm David Simon. Thank you once again to Esther and Aletha for inviting me, and it's good to meet Dalian. I've heard about you, Dalian, so it's good to meet you. Okay, so the presentation is African cosmology. And when we talk about African cosmology, we're going to be looking at the Shabaka stone. We're going to look at Kemetic cosmology, Igbo cosmology, Yoruba cosmology, Dogon cosmology, and classical Zulu cosmology. Now, I'm not going to, it's not in chronological order for a reason, but basically our cosmology starts at least going back, I would say, 6,000, 7,000 years. Each time I read a research paper, African cosmology is said to go back even further. But for now, we'll just say that it's going back some 6,000 years or so. So we're going to really start with this definition here of what is African cosmology. And I've taken this definition here from the African Encyclopedia, which says African cosmology is a body or system of thought arising out of a people's history and culture that addresses issues of reality and creation, truth and value, meaning process, and that people's place within creation. So really, it's a way of life, and it's a way of studying life, studying nature, the whole cosmos, really as Dalian said so eloquently just a while ago. So we're going to ask, is African cosmology all about strange myths and deities, or is there a real science behind it? Is this just mummy water? Do we just talk about, colorful stories, or is there a science? And I'm going to be really saying that it is a science. And it's a science about ancestry. And we need to approach it with respect, but also with a tremendous amount of knowledge, skills, and reference. So the study of African cosmology is about the study of science. And this, sorry, I should really say, this presentation is based on one of my books, How to Unlock Your Genius Using Black History. And this is, I just put this book up because this is on the Dogon. We'll be looking at the Dogons, but this is a research scientist, computer scientist who approached Dogon cosmology with his training in science. So we need to approach African cosmology using chemistry, biology, physics, comparative linguistics, as well as anthropology. Cheikh Anta Diop, one of our greatest historians, insisted on a rigorous methodology, which he used to prove that the ancient Egyptians, Comitians, were Black Africans. So how was African cosmology taught, relayed? Well, in our temples, Helipos, Hermopolis, Menphi, etc., they use storytelling, proverbs, hieroglyphs, as well as formal lectures. They use popular cultural expressions which they put in various parts of Africa. They put in odus, verses of Ifa, proverbs, and sutras of Black India. So there's a whole cultural, different cultural genres we use to teach African cosmology. And we're going to be looking also in the book, it has a love story. We're going to be looking at how can African cosmology help the Black relationship? How can African cosmology help the Black relationship, or help us in our contemporary challenges? Because really what we're saying is that it's a tool for modern society. It's a tool for Black people of today, but we have to study it in order to unravel the richness that it has, the keys, the problem-solving solutions that it has. So we're going to be looking at this story between Priscilla and Percy towards the end, if we have enough time, that is. Okay, and I'll explain this scenario later in the presentation. So what was our ways of knowing? So it's through divination, it was through revelation, it was through intuition and reason, it was through study. So, and what does cosmology demonstrate? Well, it demonstrates that the human being is limited, is a limited expression of the cosmic order. The cosmic order is governed by the supreme being. The human existence is determined by the work, will of the deity's ancestors. And each human exists because of an ancestral line. So each human being has a personal incarnation objective. So like the Igbo would say, there was a chi. You came into this earth with a chi, a pact. You asked for these challenges. But if you embrace your cosmology, your culture, then the journey through life will be easier. And this is some priests from the Lalibela in Ethiopia. So what does African cosmology demonstrate? Well, it gives us a spiritual anatomy. Because of time, we won't go through this in detail, but you've got 7, and 7 is quite a key number. You've got the Ba division, the Ku division, the Shechem division, the Ab division, the Sahu division, the Kaibit division, the Kab division. This is your spiritual anatomy. And all various cosmologies, African cosmologies, Pan-African cosmologies will have a spiritual anatomy. They don't agree 100%, but basically you have a physical body and you have a spiritual body. And the earth, the cosmos is governed by 11 laws. Oludumare, this is the Yoruba tradition, Obatala, Orunmila, Babalu-Aye, Ma'at, I quote 2 traditions here. Chagulia, which is Ma'at, Ogun, which is Herakuti, Shango, which is Heru, Oshun, which is Heteru, Ilegba, which is Sebek in the Kemetic tradition, Yimaya, which is Oset in the Kemetic tradition, and you've got Geb. So these are the 11 laws. So when the earth was being, the cosmos was being created, it was there were strict laws, and those laws governed the human as well. So we are the cosmos. So when we study cosmology, we are really studying the divine template. And we study it in order to know ourselves, in order to know how to live as well. So we're going to be looking at the Shabaka stone. So it's a text that looks at the principle of creation, its genesis, and the order of the universe. So it functions. So this is a copy, a drawing of the Shabaka stone. I'll show you it, the actual stone in a while. But basically, this is one of our texts, our spiritual texts. And it's a historical document. It's created by Shabaka, King Shabaka, the Pharaoh of Nubia, in the Old Kingdom, 2780 BC. It was created, and it's a story on creation, and it gives various names for God. So God, because God has different aspects, it might refer to God as Nu, then Ptah, then Atum, and then Nunet, which is the feminine, and then the Neteru, which is the aspects of God. But they didn't believe, they weren't polytheistic as such. This is the actual stone. So when you are studying African cosmology, there is kind of like a language, as it were. They'll often talk about the heart, which modern science now refers to the heart brain. But in African cosmology, it's very much the seat of intelligence. The tongue, which means practical expression of thought. The ka, which is the soul, the spirit. The ba, which means the vital energy. And I've used Obenga, Theophile Obenga, which is a great scholar, to kind of look into and study the Shabaka stone. But it's part of our spiritual literature. So when we come to studying Kemetic literature, you can look at the Pertem Heru, which is also known as the Book of the Dead, but the real name is the Pertem Heru, the Book of Coming Forth by Day. But then you can also study this text. And he based this text on an older text, a text that was 3,000 years older. So, our literature, and we did write, we wrote on bark, we wrote on stone, we wrote on the landscape, etc. So we were a literary people, not as well as an oral people. So, and this is a map of, so when we studied the cosmos, it gave us a map of who we were. And we broke it down into this put Neteru, which is a map of humanity, of who you are, from the physical body to Osir, you being an Osir man and living in absolute peace. It may well vary, these various deities, we call Geb, I'll go up in the chat, Geb, Oset, Sebek, Heteru, Heru, Herakuti, Ma'at, Tahuti, Seka, Osir. Because when Africa moved from matriarchal societies to patriarchy, sometimes you had the swapping of a female deity with a masculine deity. So these are Obatala priests in a temple in Ife. So, so this was the mapping. So this was the study of what cosmology gave us. And this is how it was mapped out in one of many African spiritual traditions. Now, I won't read this because of time. I think I've got 20 minutes. I won't read this, but this is the translation of the Shabaka stone. So this is the actual Shabaka stone. You can see the writing, the historical documentation, and this is the actual text here. Yeah, okay, which is, obviously you may know it as hieroglyphs. It's referred to as Medinatir as well. Okay. So we look at the Dogon cosmology of Mali, and the teachings of the Dogon cosmology was delivered by a Dogon priest called Ogotemeli to a French anthropologist, Marcel Grion. And this cosmology consisted of astrology, anatomy, measurements, and mathematics. So the Dogons of Mali say that Ama, or Mun, their name for the supreme being, consisted of 4 elements. And this is also true of many of the traditions. For example, like the Igbo, they will say air, earth, fire, water, all assigned to the 4 cardinal directions. Ama was a cosmic egg, again, like the Zulu cosmology, full of fertility, and through creative thought designed the universe using 266 cosmic signs. After the second attempt, it was creation was successful, or creation was set in process. So all these cosmologies document precisely how the cosmos was created, and therefore how humans were created, because we are the cosmos, or a micro version, as it were. And again, this is a translation of the Dogon cosmology, just a tiny extract would say all things belong to Amma, God. He created earth, he did well. Amma created the sky, he did well. Amma created the water, he did well. Amma created Nomo, he did well. Water from the sky fell on the earth, he did well. It filled the holes, he did well. And this is from the book, but obviously it was a lot longer. So our cosmology was also presented in epic poetry, Zulu, in sutras, Black India, in Odu verses, Yoruba, a whole variety of ways. We presented African cosmology. But basically, we wanted it as public education. It wasn't spirituality where it's like tucked away in the church. It's very much something for the people. So Igbo cosmology, so some sources, so we'll just visit a few different cosmologies, snapshots of cosmology. Some sources say that the Igbo society claim that they originated from ancient Egypt. Others say that they came from a Jewish culture. Often in Igbo culture, their folk tales show a hero having to go over 7 hills or travel through 7 forests or 7 stretches of grassland. Thus, the hero, that's often portrayed as a creature, a tortoise or dog, will go through 7 initiations. So that's quite an important number as well. Igbos believe that all things are good, but this goodness can be disturbed and bring about misfortune. So the Igbos, obviously, they will pour, like many African societies and Caribbean societies, they pour libation. So my parents from a very African Caribbean island, Carriacou, and they've always poured libation. So pouring of libation, cutting of cola nuts. They believed in 2 worlds, the seen and the unseen. So the seen world is actually just consists of 7% of reality, and the unseen world is 93%. So they saw 2 worlds. So therefore their process of studying the cosmos meant that they had to access the unseen world. So they developed techniques for that. So Igbo society is organized through traditional governments, family leaders, age grades association, village units, and extended family. And they had 3 names for God: Chukwu, Osibuluwa, and Chineke. And they had 7 ways to experience God or to gain access to God. And they believed in having a chi. So before you came to earth, you had a chi, a pact. You made a pact. You said, I want this experience, because earth was a learning, is a learning zone. Cosmology. So Yoruba used to be tied with the Igbos, and they branched off apparently 6,000 years ago. And praise, so essentially spirituality of the human development, which Yoruba is, consists of praise to Olodumare, the name for God, and the various aspects of God, which they term Orishas, the daily honoring of ancestors, the practice of divination, the maintenance and balancing of the Ori, that is the physical and the conscious head, and the spiritual head that resides in heaven. Basically, if you live by divine law, you live a balanced life. You don't go mad. You don't lose your head, as it were. And they believed about achieving a balance and harmony in one's destiny. So the Yoruba cosmology describes creation and how it occurs through expansion and contraction, through light and dark, and how the various Orishas, both male and female, work. They have a body of wisdom known as Ifa, which is a collection of disciplines that consist of divination, mathematics, science, and psychology. And in my book, I make reference to two computer scientists who actually study IFA and say that it's actually a binary computer system. And they say it requires, when you go to IFA priest and you bring your problem, you're putting in data. The IFA is a system that uses probability, psychology, a range of disciplines. So you put in that data, it stores the data, the priest works on it. So the priest, we might even view the priest as a psychologist stroke mathematician, and it gives you advice. It communicates this data, this knowledge. Okay, so you also got classical Zulu cosmology. So I look at the work of Mazin Kunen, who says that the Zulus see reality in duality, again, common in African cosmology. It says they look at this and they study the seen and the unseen world. And they basically saying that it must be, you have to be in balance. And this balance is maintained by the god Nonkululewani. Zulu believes that Earth is a learning zone for human development, and it's three worlds. And the most important world is the first world, which is the world of the human. That's a picture of the great Shaka Zulu there. So I just put that picture in because when the Zulus were fighting for their land, they were fighting for their culture, their cosmology. So in the book, I don't have time to do this, unfortunately, but in the book, what we have is a marriage that goes wrong. And we ask, can African spirituality, can African cosmology assist this, this relationship? And we look at this relationship. It runs throughout the book. Their whole story runs throughout the book. And we ask, can cosmology assist them? Can it provide cultural therapy for them? And we use a triangular model where you have 3 points, really. You have their marriage is the problem. You have a topographical look at their problem from here, which is the vantage point of a trained, which would be a trained priest. You have a ground view, which contains empirical knowledge, where they might try and sort out this problem, but they can't because they can't see all the various factors involved. And then you have a clan view or rational knowledge where the clan members, the elders will gather and give advice. So this is from the Basotho people of South Africa. And one of them, Zulu Matabu, whose work I've quoted here, he's using supersets and subsets maths. And this is showing you have a issue, but when you're at the ground, can you see how everything is interrelated? Can you see how their separation would help the child, upset the child that they have, upset the community, etc., etc. So this is, the triangular knowledge system of the Basotho people of South Africa is a cultural template. That's what cosmology is. It's a cultural template. And the Africans studied it and they applied their genius to it so that they could address their issues. And that's why you had all over Africa, you had like Nabta Playa, you had astrological centers where they studied the cosmos, not because they wanted to keep looking at the stars, because that was where the knowledge was in which they could base the template they could use to live their life. So I'm going to leave it there. Anybody would like to view my books? Yeah, so a lot of what I've just said is in this particular book. It's part of a series, the Genius series. You can get it on that website. Okay, so thank you very much. Okay,
thank you for that, David. That was fantastic. Okay. And we did want to very deliberately take that approach, like I said, for those who have just recently joined, just to provide a bit of an overview as to African cosmologies And hopefully that's giving you a good base structure to then work from as we proceed with the presentation. There was a lot there. I think we will be able to revisit some of those points during the Q&A, but in the interest of time, we will move on. But fantastic to see, especially at the end, how the African cosmology is actually used as a problem-solving technique for our specific issues. So fantastic. Okay, so moving on into the usual style, which is the questions to the panel. Our next section is section 2, spirituality and religion, retracing the origins of contemporary Christianity. So the first question is, evidence by Black and white scholars point to today's concept of European Christianity having firm roots in Kemetic spirituality, and even at some point further back still. So is what we see today in terms of Christianity a natural evolution, or is it a grotesque and blatant plagiarizing or something much worse? So Brother Dalian, I'd like to throw that question to yourself first, if I may.
Well, you know, firstly, I'd like to say a lovely presentation from David. You know, I do have David's books. When we decided to homeschool, one of David's books was very influential. I believe it's that one, How to Unlock Your Child's Genius, because I'm an educationist myself. So I'll recommend for any parents, maybe even just any general adult, to have a read. There's some very, very useful information in there. So to your question now, Esther, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, you know, if we take even at the basic, should we say, premise, starting point, that if all human beings originate from Africa, then we can just simply conclude that all thought forms, all thought systems are a development from that point of source. However, in the development and the passage of time, people also add, because that's what knowledge is, yes? Knowledge is a progression of ideas and understandings over time. And sometimes, you know, you will have to mold the knowledge base to fit a particular situation. And this is where we now then start to find the advent of religion. Because religion then exists within a set dogma or set of ideas, and this is used to define the religion. In African spirituality or natural science, your only Bible or holy book, so to speak, is nature that you observe, because you observe how nature reflects back onto yourself as a human being. As David mentioned about the human being being a microcosm of the universe, which is the macrocosm. So yes, Christianity, we can view in many elements of it as an extension of African cosmological systems, but where it falls short to a degree is the sense that this knowledge has been packaged in a particular way. And in so doing, you create, in a sense, a bastardized version of the original, if you will. We do know that this knowledge was taken from the Greeks. You know, many Greeks studied in the place we call Egypt today, or the Nile Valley. And we also know that the Nile Valley, most of their cosmological systems, because they say it in their own writings, was derived from the area that people now call sub-Saharan. I don't like that word because for me, it's to be honest, a racist term. You cannot have a sub of a continent. All landmass exists from the point at which they come out of the ocean body. So there's nothing sub. We are talking of the Africans south of the Sahara. Not sub-Saharan Africans. That it makes absolutely no sense. So this knowledge is just an extension of that African thought or African understandings, yes? And there are many, many aspects of Christianity that we can draw direct correlations with in various African cosmological systems. So that would be my my contribution to that question. It is a bastardized version of the African understanding.
Thank you, Brother Dalian. And before we move to comments, Brother David, would you like to add to that?
The Europeans, I think what they got hold of African spirituality, and they basically misinterpreted it. They didn't have the skill to interpret it correctly, so they sent for so many scholars. So a lot of these so-called Christian theologians, like Tertullian, Origen, Saint Augustine, Cyprian, for example, these were the ones. So it's Africans that actually interpreted and translated it. And a lot of these, I think it's the Archbishop of Canterbury, actually brought over an African by the name of Hadrian to actually interpret the Bible. So it's a gross misinterpretation of African spirituality. And you got to remember that Christianity came into Africa first. So a lot of us think that Christianity came via enslavement and colonialism. But in fact, it came to Egypt first, then to Nubia, and then to Ethiopia. And it was just one of many Bantu religions. It was one of many spiritual systems. But what happened, Constantine identified it and used it so that he could unite the Roman Empire and subdue and carry out his kind of political maneuverings. But it was, so that's really, so that early Christianity, it was African. It was one of many Bantu religions, and the Europeans didn't really understand it. When they sent for, because they were Africans all over Europe, they sent for Africans all over Europe, and they to teach them, because Africans, although many of them had Greek names, they were Africans. So all the people who interpreted the so-called three great theologians that I mentioned, Tertullian, Cyprian, and Saint Augustine, they were all born in Africa. But when you see books on them, they put white people on the front. So we think that they are white people. I studied Saint Augustine at uni, and it was, I had no idea. I was studying a black man, you see, his work, you know, so they misinterpreted it. They sent for us. We were the ones who actually interpreted it, translated it, etc. And when they got hold of it, they used it for European imperialism. They used it for European imperialism, and they were obviously patriarchal. So it lost its richness, and it was used to oppress us.
So I want to move on to the next question. So the question is, why is it important that we're able to actually make a distinction between the modern, or this concept, this bastardized concept, as you said, of Christianity against what we understand as being the foundation of the idea? Why is it important for us? I mean, you've already alluded to the fact that it was politicized, but can you elaborate on why that is an important thing?
Yes, why that, what, to be fair, I think where we should start from on that discussion, Esther, is that while people are free to practice Christianity today, let's not forget that all over the world, those who are still African spiritual adherents or devotees face persecution. Funny enough, mainly from Christian people who identify as Christian. In some cases, Black people themselves. So this is where you hear the word witchcraft, you hear the word juju, you hear the word obia. So I think the distinction that we need to make really for Black people or melanated people, whatever the term is, that we do not need to discard African cosmologies, yes? The understanding we have of it being juju or something negative comes from the same people who used it in our colonization. So this is the first distinction that we need to make, that even if as are now, because of our religious sensibilities, we think we do not want to go anywhere near African spirituality, we should still allow those who are of that orientation to further their ancestral connection. There is no need for the persecution. Yes, it's like you say, no, I don't like this part of my heritage, so I'm just going to chop it off. That means you're always going to be incomplete. You will really never know the full extent of yourself. Yes, let's not also forget that even the reason that we have these false ideas about what African cosmology entails, you know, David gave the first example, again, falls into the political space. So, if you go to any be it African country now, even in the Caribbean, African spirituality in all its expressions is criminalized. Why? Because the British Empire put in a law in 1760 in Jamaica, because it had identified that African spirituality and African spiritual counselors were the source from which Africans rebelled against enslavement. This is in the history books. You can find him there. The historian is called Edward Long. So the distinction we need to make is it's not evil or negative. Absolutely, people can use it in a negative way, but then we saw Europeans use Christianity to come and enslave and kill hundreds and millions of Africans. Which is more evil, if you will? Yeah. So let's make the first distinction. African cosmological systems are not evil, and even if we do not have a desire to, let's say, practice them, we also should not persecute its practitioners. That's the key distinction we need to make. And the other most important distinction is that even if we do not learn about them, we will never know what being complete is. Totally impossible. Yeah, so these are the core distinctions I want us to make. That African spirituality is not at odds with Christianity. It's an extension of the same idea, just in a sense streamlined. And we do ourselves an injustice when we keep persecuting our own to cut ourselves off from our own heritage. At least just get a basic understanding of it. You don't need to be a practitioner. Yeah, but yeah, the persecution is a lot. It's a lot. Yeah, so that's my main distinction. It's not evil. Let's inform ourselves better.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Dr. Dalian. Essentially, it sounds like it's actually quite pivotal and central to this whole sense of self-reliance and actually realizing a lot of what we want to do as a community. How do you do that if you're not complete? So a fantastic point. Brother David, I'll hand over to you.
Okay. Well, I think Western Christianity serves Western culture. It serves Western power. It's part of Western power. So we need to distinguish. As you were talking, actually, I was, sorry, I just finished teaching another class, and a book that came to mind as you were talking, I don't know if, I'm sure you're probably aware of this one, How Africans Shape the Christian Mind. Well, it kind of like really is saying that true Christianity, or the original Christianity, was shaped by these Africans. So we have an African Christianity, which has been suppressed. Not many people know about it. And we have a Christianity that is the European form. So the European form, sorry, somebody just asked again. I'll just hold it up. It's called How Africa Shaped the Christian Mind. It's one of many books coming out over the last, say, 10, 12 years about the original Christianity that came out, and I'll call it Africa, though they might call it so-called Middle East. It's really Africa, because they kind of like cut off a part of Africa, but the so-called Middle East was Africa. It was populated by Africans. So the Africans that were there developed a spiritual system that later became known as Christianity. So it's important to distinguish that Western Christianity serves Western imperialism. and it destroyed and it misinterpreted many of the fundamental teachings of Christianity. And Christianity, the original Christianity, wasn't called Christianity, was originally an African religion. It's one of the many that was being practiced. And what this has done, and why it's important, is because it destroys the mind. You know, it destroys the African mind, because as Dalian said, you begin to hate that which gives you power. African cosmology gives you power because it's a problem-solving device. When we have problems, what's happened, like during the whole kind of like anti-colonial period of independence, we look to Marxism, we look to a form of liberalism or socialism. Never do we look at African cosmology and say, what does it teach us? This body of wisdom, we're talking about a body of wisdom that is 250,000 years long. What does it teach us in terms of our problem-solving device? And the problem-solving devices were for problems that we were familiar with, recurring problems, and it's also for problems that we've never faced, you see. So it's important to distinguish between these forms of Western Christianity and African spiritual systems, because one has been totally corrupted, and that's the Western Christianity. It serves Western imperialism.
And I think with that, David, it is something that is deeply entrenched within the Black community. I think, you know, controversial to say, but I think sometimes we take Christianity far more personally than, you know, the European, should I say, or the Westernized version of Christianity more personally than the Westerners themselves, or the Europeans themselves. So they've actually, to some extent, jettisoned traditional ideas of Christianity for secularism. You know, so it's interesting that we still cleave so strong and so vehemently to something that they seem to have disposed of in all but you know, name. So that's very interesting. One question that I do want to ask is, can you, as an individual, be both a Christian whilst at the same time expressing or participating in your African spiritual system? Can that duality exist? I mean, based on what you said, it sounds as though the very original notion of Christianity is in itself an African spiritual system. But as far as today's Christian in this setting, within the UK context, what we understand as Christianity is far removed from that. So what I'm asking is, can today's modern Christian be equally involved or participate in their African cosmology?
That's for me, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. I would say, if you asked me 10 years ago, I would have said, I don't think so. Now, there are so many groups emerging and so many books coming out. For example, I just read a wonderful book called The Africans Who Wrote the Bible. And these are African Christians, but they are saying true Christianity came via, you know, Egypt and Ethiopia and Nubia, etc. And I'm reading so many books from people like that who are rejecting the Western Christianity. So I would say yes, definitely, because they are studying the original text as well. So in order for you to become, you know, a genuine Christian now, you have to study those original texts, and even the ones that were some of the texts that were plagiarized, that were, for example, I think when we did the course, when you did one of my courses, we looked at the work of Mama Zogby, and she basically was saying that a lot of the so-called Christian texts, they were written by African women who followed an African spiritual tradition. And then the men, as matriarchy was being suppressed, they then came and rewrote it. So instead of having women consorts or female deities, you suddenly had male deities. So a lot of work needs to be done, and a lot of work is being done, because people are now looking at the text. They're looking at the Hebrew text, Hebrew, which is another Bantu language. They are looking at even Greek texts. So I would say, yes, it is happening. I don't know that many groups, but I know at least, I think, about 3 groups, African Christian groups, who are rejecting Western Christianity, and they are researching the roots of Christianity in Africa.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. And I wonder if they've actually come to a place where they are reclaiming it, and maybe actually even renaming it in terms of what it ought to be recognized as, because I think just the word Christianity in itself still has its own implications. So Brother Dalian, I'll ask you to also chime in on this question, please.
Yes, Esther. No, absolutely. On an individual level, you know, each is really free to express themselves how they feel. I've been doing this long enough, well enough, met a range of people all over the world to kind of get some of the core fundamental issues that we face. And for me, it's not about kind of shaking around those issues. As I've said, the main core objection, African spiritual adherents have absolutely no problem with any system of faith. Where the problem comes is particularly in some of the dogma and the scriptures, and how it seeks to define African spiritual concepts. Yes. So for instance, you have like Nigerian Christians who will equate the energy called Eshu with Satan in the Bible. Now, Satan and Eshu are in no way similar, but because most the person who even, for instance, retranslated the Bible into the Yoruba language, because they needed to find where to map some of these Christian concepts with African cosmology, they just willy-nilly just picked any and everything. Things that didn't even exist in there, they forced it in there. So, you know, if individually you're a melanated person and you feel that you want a connection to African cosmological systems, I've met many people who do that. That's absolutely no problem. Where the problem comes is at the structural level, the institutional level. Yeah, I can show you any video today, this Sunday gone, or many African Christian channels, and you hear them talking about ancestral curses. And you know, you can't go to your village because there's an ancestral curse, and there's a this. At an institutional level, there's a campaign to totally obliterate any form of African cosmological understanding. Totally. I can pull up UN reports for you. Again, all these things go under this mislabel of witchcraft. You have children being sexually abused, yeah, by so-called pastors. We can only look to even when Libya fell. You saw what what's their name again? Not only the Fulani, the Tuaregs went into Mali and started breaking down all form of ancestral shrines. They wiped out a historical legacy. So as an individual, I mean, by all means do so. But personally, what I will have to say is each and every Black, whether Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hebrew, Israelite, has the responsibility, yeah, to put back onto the, should we say, religious community. This hate has to stop, because we're hating ourselves. where we are actually now causing more of our own cultural erasure than the European who instigated, or the Arab who started that process long ago. So absolutely, there's no parameters. You know, you and your relationship to this source we call God, or the source of all things, it's always been personal. You can add, it's knowledge. Knowledge just expands you, makes you more aware. It makes you more astute. It makes you more cognizant of the way the physical world works. So isn't there even a verse from the Bible where Jesus says, "My people die from the lack of knowledge"? And knowledge is not only spirit and religious knowledge. Knowledge is everything that can improve you as a human being in the way you think, behave, or act. So no, African spiritual traditional practitioners, we don't have no problem at all with any religion. But at an institutional level, yes, these institutions are causing great harm to the African way of life and the African lineage. As I've said already, I will encourage everyone, no matter how deeply devout religious person you are, again, it's information. The same way you will read a scientific article about the latest development at the CERN research lab, even though you're not a scientist, it's the same way we need to treat African cosmological knowledge. Let's get a basic understanding of it so it helps us not believe in falsehoods about it. But yeah, it's absolutely possible, totally possible.
Thank you. That was a very comprehensive response. Thank you very much for that, Dalian. So we now move on to the final section, the weapons of our warfare, onto Black subjugation or Black liberation. So I think to some extent we've kind of drifted in and out of this particular area that we're going to cover now. But let me start with the first question of this section, which is with reference to specific examples, to what extent has Christianity been weaponized against the Black community globally? So I'll start with David with that one, please.
I have to think about that. Has it been weaponized? Well, it was used as part of the enslavement. It made us hate ourselves. It made us turn against and reject our own the cosmology and religion. And it's the imagery. By having a white Jesus, by having all white biblical characters, that has done so much damage. You know, I travel all over the world, and I go into, you know, the homes of Black families in Africa and the Caribbean and America, and you see a white Jesus. And that does, you know, that's why, you know, what did Garvey do when he started the UNIA? One of the things he did is say that, you know, the people of the Bible and God is Black. That was a monumental thing to do back in the 1920s and 30s, because we just carry so much self-hatred. And the fact that I think 80% of Nigerian women use skin lightness still, it means that the Bible, which is propaganda, was used as propaganda by the Western enslavers. It means that it's been effective. So you had this misinterpretation of, you know, Ham and the curse of Ham, and you know, you had these presentation of white biblical figures, and all of that again has played its part in destroying the African mind and its engagement with African cosmology. Because on one hand, you have that, so it has been weaponized. And then when you look at, you know, what the church has done, you know, in slavery times, because many of the church leaders and the church had they invested heavily in the slave trade. You look at what they've done, and then you look at what they've done. You can see that it's been it's been the institution, as Dalian said, it's been the whole institution of the church has been to use their form of Christianity as a weapon in destroying the mind. And so it's left the Africans with tremendous self-hatred and lack of confidence. or self-confidence.
Thank you, David. I think that covers quite a lot. But I still would like Dalian, if you could add to that as well.
Absolutely, Esther. I didn't remember there was this section coming. I think I've answered quite a bit of that section already. But now, just to, in a sense, add on to David's point, because it's a very important point, and this is where some of us take this aspect for granted. You know, what we could even just generally call religion and even spirituality, you know, unless you've had certain spiritual experiences, it's largely an exercise that starts here in the mind. Yeah, this is the first, should we say, stage of at which we process understanding and everything else. So if in your mind, the person who's going to save you looks like a European, then that means you will extend that reverence to any and every person that looks like this person who you've already accepted is going to save you. Yes? So whenever you see anyone that looks like that depiction, you think you've seen your savior. I'll give you an example that a friend of mine told me in one of the rural areas of Ghana. He was coming back from his farm and he met some of the people who were coming back from a church service. And the man was saying, oh, today is his luckiest of days because today he's not even going to have a bath when he gets home. Why? Because they had brought a white pastor to that village. And this is the first person, the first white person, clearly, that this person who lives in the village had seen. But even without the fact that this person can even read in the so-called, you know, the education in terms of English, somehow they've already and automatically made this association that this priest represents Jesus because they look white. This is simple psychology. None of us need degrees, PhDs or MAs to understand this. It's simple association. So if you've accepted that your savior is a white man, then you can never even look at the damage they're doing to you socially and even want to, should we say, challenge it. Because how are you going to challenge your savior? It's impossible. So we've come leaps and bounds, though. We've come to a stage where, as David correctly said, it's not only the Honorable Marcus Garvey, Omuwale Malcolm X talked about it a lot, Dr. Amos Wilson. Many of us have started to see where this psychological impact comes. So that is the key weapon. You know, I've heard even other scholars talk about the fact that you walk into black homes and instead of the central place where you're meant to see an image of the family, celebrating yourself as a family, you see a white man on the wall. What's the white man doing there? Yeah, and then now we'll still say that God is a spirit. God is an energy now. I'm hearing this a lot more from some of my Christian brothers and sisters. And I like to hear that because then now we do not have any form of this archetype that can really lock our mind into what something is meant to look like. Yes, those depictions or reinterpretation of African imagery is perhaps the most serious weapon that has invaded the African mind. And it plays out in so many ways. Yeah? So it's the depictions. Knowledge, most of what Jesus said, the Buddha has it in the Eightfold Path. It's universal knowledge. Yeah, you will find it in the Odu Ifa too. It wasn't just one guy in the so-called Middle East who had all this wise understanding. You can find it in many faiths because it's just wisdom. Wisdom comes with experience. Literally, it is that simple. So yeah, no, that's the weapon. The physical and visual images that we see invades our minds and it subverts our understandings.
Thank you. So then, with that said, how imperative is African spirituality to the restoration of the pre-enslavement, to our pre-enslavement economic and cultural strength? So I'll start with David on that, please.
Sorry, can you just repeat that? The question, sorry.
Yes. So how imperative is African spirituality to the restoration of our pre-enslavement economic and cultural strength?
Yeah, well, as I tried to say in that short presentation, it's a problem solving, African spirituality is a problem solving tool. We should perhaps not call it cosmology or you know, African spirituality. We should call it our problem solving tool of our ancestors. And it's, you know, on the front of the book, which I think is to my right, you know, I use the term, you know, cultural therapy. We often talk about reparations. We often talk about we need to do this, we need group economics, etc. But unless the mind is in place, unless we have cultural therapy, and the only thing that can give us cultural therapy is the study of our history, not just about what one king did and this king did and perhaps a queen did, etc. But it's about how we used this template of the universe to organize our family and our extended family, which we just call family anyway, etc. And how we had age grade sets to act as a welfare system. And there's so much, our solutions are in our culture, but what they do by destroying our culture and our, you know, opportunities to access our culture, we run to them. We run to the Western intellectual tradition. And we run to the Western intellectual tradition to say, can you, the Western intellectual tradition, solve the problems of the Western intellectual tradition, which it can't, you see. So instead of running to this rich 2,500 year, 1,000-year-old source of knowledge and wisdom, etc., we run to something that's just here yesterday and is destroying the environment, is mass murdering, committing genocides in South America, North America, Africa, all over the world, and their historians hide it. And then we want to run to that body of work and bow down and worship that Western intellectualism. So it's imperative that we study this. It's imperative that we develop, like Dalian's organization and others, opportunities to study our culture, but study it and realize that our culture was, it had, you need science to study it. You need the study of computer science, or physics, of chemistry, or biology. But when our mind is so confused and destroyed with negative images, we don't approach African spirituality with that reverence, with that respect, with all these tools. We tend to, you know, use New Age terminology, you know, to describe it. We tend to use the language of white anthropologists to describe it, not realizing that it is science, it is mathematics, etc., etc. So it is imperative, and we have to do it soon. And we need a grassroots global movement. You know, I'm optimistic, and I think, and I run courses, and I'm interacting with people all over the world, and it is happening. But we need to get that critical mass, and that's what is so important. We need that critical mass in all places. We need it in education. We need it in, you know, green technologies, so-called green technologies, which isn't really green, etc., etc. So yeah, it is imperative, and we need to do it soon. And we have an advantage. We have this. We have the internet. We need to use this.
Absolutely. Thank you both so very much. What I will do is, I did have another question, more a sort of case study. So very much in keeping with the presentation that you delivered earlier, David, is, you know, there are so many, like I said, there are so many who are very, very strong in the faith, in the Christian faith. So, you know, let's take, for example, and I just use this as a case study, you know, a young lady who is from a very, very strong Christian home. a graduate, somebody who has been brought up in the church, still lives with her parents, but of working age. And following the events last year from BLM to George Floyd's murder, begins to actually begin the process of actually asking questions, and then comes to a place where she comes to a forum like this. What would be the next step for that young lady, or if it may be a young man who is at that stage where they feel a bit conflicted as to whether or not they can actually venture in to what has for so long been demonized as this taboo, you know, as this area that they shouldn't actually venture into? What advice would you give them, that person? So I'll start with David on that, please.
Right. I think to study, you know, we all have got a duty to study our culture, and we have opportunities. I saw, I think it was, is it Letha has put, is it Dalian, recommendations of books, and I recognize most of them, and you know, books inspire. I mean, I was changed when I read the book Groundings with My Brother by Walter Rodney on African culture. I was perhaps, you know, 14 or something like that. It changed me. Then when I read Malcolm X's autobiography when I was 19, I think, it changed me. You know, we need to introduce people to books. A lot of people do not, the books that I mentioned in the chat, a lot of people do not know about Black books or have access to it. I met somebody, I was speaking to, you know, really intelligent young Black woman, and she had completed her MA, and she said to me, she only recently read her first book ever by a Black author, you see. So that is, and what's happening in the universities, they have, you know, white reading lists, you know, there's talk, I know everybody wants to talk about decolonizing the curriculum, but we have to get these books into our communities more, and into our young people more. And we have to use strategies like theater, poetry, film, etc., to start making our young, our old, whoever think, you see. And I find, I do find both Christians and Muslims receptive, because there are questions that they have at the back of their heads as to, you know, is this really right? I mean, one of the books I mentioned and I said I recommended is The Africans Who Wrote the Bible. There's another one, linguistic ties between ancient Egyptian and Bantu. And these books, this make you think, because they've been indoctrinated, you see. And we have to kind of like very skillfully, if they happen to come to a class that, you know, Dalian might be running a class, or what you do here, Esther and Aletha, if they, you know, they need to be kind of like introduced slowly and skillfully and supportively to books and texts, and have conversations, not threatening them, not condemning them, because sometimes I think on the Pan-African scene, it can be too dogmatic, you know, and then people feel, you know, it's not a comfortable space for them to engage. And so I think, going back to your point, people have to be exposed. You know, people are much more intelligent, and as a people, I find that our spirit, we all, you know, whether we're Christian or Muslim, we have an African spirit. And despite all that propaganda, the African spirit is saying, I need to drink from from African spirituality. And African spirituality, you know, is a science, but it's also poetry. It's also, you know, something that of beauty, you know. So I would say it's about exposure, and it's about educating them.
Thank you. Thank you. Dalian, I'll let you have the final word on that.
Yes, Esther, I believe you said your question is, if you're new to it, Is it where should you start, or what advice would I give?
Yeah, so really just trying to understand for somebody who is new to African culture, as David has referred to it as, to be quite honest, I think we need to start reframing it in terms of the language so that people aren't so far removed. Absolutely. But how do they begin to access that space, particularly when they feel so conflicted with where they are now in terms of their strong ideology and their values that they've held for however many years?
Right. The best advice I would say is, if you're excited by much of the quantum discoveries happening going on in Western science, if you're excited by things like that CERN research project, then you should be as excited about African cosmological systems, because everything being studied there, Africans have had all these epiphanies from time immemorial. And I'll give you one of the, should we say, a key simple example. Yeah. Recently, they came up with this concept called epigenetics. Epigenetics is also related to this new science of working at a genetic level with this vaccine, the mRNA. That's because only recently Western scientists understood that all our cells have memory. So just as you think you have memory stuck up here in your brain, each and every individual cell in your body has its own subset of memory. So you're constantly always already speaking to your ancestors. Every aspect of your personality is not just you. You, the individual that you see as a one unit, you're composed of about a million different minds. Yeah. But if you believe in epigenetics and say this is verifiable, accurate science, but if you then are told that, you know what, your ancestors are constantly speaking to you, and you say that's superstition, what more can I say? What more can I say? You know, African spirituality has no, what we call it, proselytizing or forcing people to kind of believe in something, because really everything you need to know, you already know it. But the problem is the way we're kind of socialized and educated in this system, where even from when you're born, you're told you don't know nothing unless an expert is telling you. So most of us don't even know how to, what we call it, what will I call it, the process of gnosis, the process of knowing from within. We do not do that. They'll tell you your intuition is, oh, that's just nonsense. It's not verifiable science. But your intuition is an aspect of your direct connection to what we call nature. So the only thing I'll tell anybody entering this space, as I said, is if you're fascinated by the discoveries in Western science, then you should be just as fascinated about wanting to learn about African cosmology. Because we've done the research to the degree where now we can make very direct links to most of these new developments. That's all I can say. But we cannot force people to come to it. You come to it if your spirit is ready and it calls out to you. You will know. It won't be me telling you. You will know. So that's all I can say is that.
Very powerful. Very, very powerful. Thank you so much. And on that note, I just want to very quickly round off just with a few points that were touched on for the benefit of those still on the platform. I think the advice that is very key to take away is to study your culture. Don't necessarily frame it in the negative language that it has been framed in, that seeks to polarize you and alienate you from what is actually yours. So just get to know, and similar to what Brother Dalian was saying, you know, all of these things that are now, you know, apparent that we see being venerated or revered in Western science and development are things that are very much part and parcel of where we're coming from. So give that same level of interest, if not more, with greater fervor towards African culture and where we're coming from. I'm sure you'll find it a lot more fascinating. And then again, challenge the structural elements that seek to malign and to criminalize African spirituality and ideas. And very much thinking about the language that we use. I think I've mentioned this in the previous Zoom as well. The language that we use to speak about ourselves is very, very important because that language is actually, it has power and it gives life. And then also to remember that, you know, we're all here because we want to move forward as a people, but we can't move forward without that completion. You know, Brother Dalian had actually said at the beginning that it's about being complete, you know, and without knowing where we're coming from, we cannot even seek to be complete, especially when we have images on the walls as believers of whatever respective faith that do not represent or look like us. So the message of representation also extends to this, and probably in a more important and profound way, that at the point of our metaphysical or spiritual selves, that ultimately defines a lot of what we see in the natural. So if we are able to actually lean into images or ideas, concepts that are actually rooted in an Afrocentric position, then that will be a great starting point for us to actually begin to move forward as a community. So those are some of the points that I just wanted to leave us with.